Welcome to this joint overview and scrutiny committee. I'm Councillor John Hinton and I'm chairing the meeting today. May I first remind you of some domestic arrangements. Please ensure that microphones are turned off when not in use and that you do not interrupt other speakers. If you are attending the meeting to speak and persistently interrupt the meeting, you may be asked to leave. Please ensure your mobile phones and laptops are on silent. Additionally, we will be using the e-voting for this meeting on the Modern Gov app. I would like to remind everyone present, no, we're not all presidents just yet, everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be filmed except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you will be deemed by the Council to have consented to being filmed. By entering this meeting as a speaker, you are also consenting to being recorded by the Council and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and or training purposes. The Council, members of the public and the press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and the press are not lawfully excluded. We are joined today by Mark Ems, Director of Operations, and Jack Burton, Finance Business Partner for the item on Public Realm, and by Jan Robinson, Corporate Manager for Law and Governance, and of course Alicia Norman, our Lead Officer for Overview and Scrutiny. Can I move to the agenda, please? Apologies for absence and substitutions.
Thank you, Chair. This morning we have apologies from Councillor Ekpingong.
To receive declarations of pecuniary, other registrable or non-registrable interests by members. Any? No. None received. Right. To confirm the minutes of the joint meeting held on the 20th of February 2023. Are there any points regarding the accuracy of these minutes? No. Could I have a proposer, please? Councillor Osborne, Councillor Muller, and the seconder, Frank, thank you. Got those? The Governance Officer will conduct the electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. Members, that vote is now in progress.
Everybody?
Councillor Grandin, can I take your vote verbally? That's fine. Councillor Lindsay, can I take your vote verbally as well, please?
Just managed to log back on to my office.
No worries.
Just voting as well.
Thank you.
That's right, you don't get 2 votes.
Thank you, Chair. So that makes 9 votes for and 2 abstentions. That's carried.
Thank you. The minutes of the joint meeting on the 20th of February have been confirmed. To receive notification of petitions in accordance with the Council's petition scheme.
None received, Chair.
Questions by the public?
None received.
Questions by councillors?
None received, Chair. Thank you.
Item 7, the information bulletin, review of current levels of untreated sewage discharges to waters in Babergh and mid-Suffolk. This item has been deferred to the next joint overview and scrutiny committee, which will be on the 24th of July 2023. This decision has been made at the request of the agencies due to attend the committee to answer questions on the item. This is to allow them time to finalise the compilation of all 2022 data on sewage discharges and water quality, which is due to be finished in early April 2023. I think it's important that if we're going to look at this data, this situation, and put forward some concrete and workable suggestions, then we have all the up-to-date information available. So I think it's important that we do defer this until the July meeting. I think there will also be a new Chief Executive of the Environment Agency by that time as well, because he's just being replaced. Councillor Lindsay.
Yes, it sounds sensible, Chair. Just wanted to ask if it could be, if not the only item of business on that day, at least, you know, that the agenda not be too heavily laden with other things that day, because it's going to be quite a big one. So, and I probably won't be there, but it's important it's scrutinised properly. Thanks.
I think we are all in that sort of situation of we're not sure whether we're going to be there or not, but we will certainly, I'll ask the governance officer to make sure that the agenda isn't heavy on that day so that there's maximum amount of time can be given to the subject. Item 8 on the agenda, information bulletin, a review of the impact of bringing public realm in-house. I'd like to invite the Director of Operations to introduce the information bulletin to the committee.
Thank you very much, Chair. So yes, as requested, I've answered, tried to address answering the questions that were raised in the last ONS meeting. So I've provided a bulletin to answer this question. We've agreed the content of the bulletin with the chairs. And this is a review of the insourcing of public realm services into Babergh from ID Verdi. You'll recall this committee looked at that when actually at the time, looked at the various options that were available and commented on them for Cabinet to make the decision. And really it's looking at whether the insourcing has delivered its objectives and whether this can be determined to be value for money for the council or not really. And happy to take any questions on the bulletin that are provided.
Questions? Councillor Dawson.
Yes. Sorry, I'd just make a comment. I'm just wondering, I have a number of questions to ask the Cabinet members. And I'm just wondering why they're not here. Regard the Cabinet members' portfolio overseeing all this. So I have a number of questions with regard to communication, which I'd quite like to put to them, and they're not here. From either side, I don't think. Is there a reason why?
No, this was an information bulletin concerning public realm, and there was no real reason for the Cabinet to be here. If you have some specific questions for the Cabinet member for public, who is responsible for public realm, then certainly we can forward them on. If you'd like to make them, we can certainly forward them on.
Thank you. On that point, I was going to make that sort of similar comment. It's a shame that the Cabinet members aren't here. It's always appreciated when we do have them. They often do attend. And it is a re-endorsement of the importance of scrutiny and the relevance to the work of the Council. So I think we should make a comment back to Cabinet that we do expect Cabinet members to come along when we're doing this important work.
Well, both Councillor Osborne and myself attend Cabinet meetings to put points across to Cabinet, and we're always asked if we've got any questions on the items on the agenda, etc. So certainly if you forward me the questions, I can make sure that they're put to the Cabinet next time there is a Cabinet meeting. It's not a problem. And also the comment about them attending, or the relevant person attending the overview and scrutiny meeting. Yep.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. In regards to asset depreciation in this, it says that assets, the depreciation is calculated over 7 years. First question is that just vehicles? And is that depreciated to zero in those 7 years, or to a level where you could sell the vehicle on? Thank you.
Yes, I'm happy to answer that. Thank you, Councillor Caston. So for the purpose of just vehicles, it's over the useful life. There's no expectation of any residual value on disposal. So it's straight line method, so not in the first year of acquisition. So 12.5% reduced over 8 years to a zero value.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Obviously, as we don't get taxed on the income and so forth of what we earn from public realm, then if there is a resale value at the end of that, then that's a bonus for us. Yes, Councillor Barrett.
Thank you. Good morning. I think I recall when we were talking about HRA account, I don't know if you were here, Mark, at that discussion, but there was talk about those public areas maintained to a higher standard. And I think I recall it being a sort of queried at the time. So is that reflected in the contribution from the HRA, and is that correct?
Yeah, I remember the conversation. It's when we were scrutinising the general budget and the HRA budget as well. I think the point of difference really is that we were talking about maintaining the HRA locations to a higher standard than they're currently being maintained. We do not want to create a two-tier sort of set of standards between the HRA and the general fund, but we did accept that the HRA assets have been underinvested in terms of the amount of time we've been spending on them for a bit of time really, and that was a legacy issue of when it was outsourced under the ID Verdi contract. It's come back into the council's direct control under its DLO operations, and we've taken a bit of time just to get on top of those standards really, and part of addressing that has been to address the recharge to make that accurate to the value of works that's been taking place.
Councillor Wellham.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Going back to earlier points about Cabinet members, I feel that we should have a formal recommendation at the end of our discussion back to all members of Cabinet and the leader, that we do expect to see Cabinet members here. Whether it's in the Cabinet scrutiny protocol or not, I think it is reasonable to expect them. And there are many in some authorities, the only people to speak at scrutiny are the Cabinet members, and they have to deal with all of the questions. So when I was at some central training, we heard this from several authorities that they felt really sort of having to be completely on the ball when they attended scrutiny, because they had to deal with everything. If I may say so, I think Cabinet members get off pretty lightly here, both authorities. But anyway, so I would like that to be a formal recommendation. I've got a number of points and questions. One was that when we debated this a long time ago, one of the concerns, both sides had concerns. I think Babergh had concerns about the one-off cost of sort of joining in with the insourcing, but Mid-Suffolk members had concerns that, oh dear, will we get a less good service and will it cost us more? There's no evidence of either, but I would just like to be reassured that the service that was being provided pre-insourcing of Babergh is the same as it, there has been no reduction in service and no increase in cost. Another thing that we were asking about at that time was, there was a discussion about the possibilities of some sort of diversification, extra services, and one in particular that we discussed was around tree surgery and emergency situations, and prior to the insourcing and development of the service, a contractor had to be called every time a tree fell down, basically. So are we now in a position where every time a tree falls down, we've got somebody with a chainsaw who can go and deal with it? If not, is that a situation that you would be able to sort out? And the big question hanging over all of the work that you do for housing is the data that you're now collecting accurate enough, broad enough, sufficient enough for really accurate recharging? Because we have had big concerns over the years that general fund is rolling in money, particularly at Mid-Suffolk, and the HRA account is not in the same position. So is there anything more that needs to be done, anything more that can be done to make sure we've got accurate data? I think that's it for the present. I may have a follow-up question. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for those, Councillor Willam. I think I'll just try and run through them. I picked a few questions up there. So, firstly, Mid-Suffolk wise, there's been no reduction to any services in Mid-Suffolk as a result of the insourcing. So at no stages, frequencies or level of service or resources going in actually changed on that. So from that perspective, there hasn't. I think the team would argue that you've now got a more resilient service because you've got more managers that can cover each other in the event of absence, and then initiatives like biodiversity that's come on with the motion was coming out just before this transfer happened, but during this period it's been better supported across the two councils, where you might have experienced higher costs and more impact on a service if you were just supporting that sort of initiative across one council. From an arboriculture, the tree surgery perspective, the short answer is we don't have a dedicated arboriculture team climbing trees, up ropes climbing, cutting down trees and do that. We do a lot of low-level tree works, we do a lot of tidying up works. If trees come down, limbs have come down, we can tidy that up, clear roads, clear pathways, that sort of type work. It's something we might look at, but it's based on the economics and the volume of whether there's enough work there to justify the cost and the risk. Obviously, climbing trees is quite a risky activity, working at heights with chainsaws. It's not something that we couldn't do. Some councils, some service arms of councils do that, and to make those types of services economical, they also trade those services commercially as they're doing that as well. So that's something we're not doing at the moment, but we might look to do. And then I think the final question was around housing data and how accurate is that at the moment. We've done an accurate recosting at what I would say is a total cost collector level. So we've reviewed our services, looked at the number of the resources that we've got working on the service, so people, vehicles, equipment, time, other service costs that are going in there. What we haven't done is break that down to a scheme-by-scheme level so that it can be accurately recharged to tenants from the HRA service itself. The reason why we haven't done that as yet at the moment is because we need more accurate mapping data on the ground, which is a project we've got 2 officers working across both councils, updating the CAD Corp system with GIS data. So we're expecting to get on top of that and get that completed later this year. And I know that it's something that I've had discussions with my colleague Deborah Fenton in housing about how we get that accurate information so it can be recharged, because obviously she's keen to accurately and fairly recharge tenants for the work happening in their schemes, and it does vary a little bit scheme by scheme.
It's sort of a follow-up question. You mentioned, Mark, you mentioned trading of services. Is this something that you do, you can do, you might do? I'm thinking in particular of kit like mow and collect and so on. There are a lot, across the districts, there are a lot of groups that are trying to grow wildflower meadows, and in particular, I think you've got a machine that's based in Stowmarket, which is some parish councils have used, I believe, or has been offered to them. Is this something that you could expand? Is it something that you want to expand and perhaps advertise? Because there's no way that a lot of parishes are going to be able to deal with their wildflower meadows in the best possible way without having access to, you know, the real best machinery. Thank you.
I think the short answer is yes, we might be looking to trade that. At the moment, we're undergoing a big change. We're on the Babergh side, we're recovering the standards up to the standard level that it should be. I've not kind of tried to hide away from that in the paper and the response that I've put forward. There's been a bit of catching up from the previous contractor, and we're just completing really the first full financial year's worth of doing that, and we really feel we'll get on top of that going forward this year. And at the same time as that, one of the core activities that we're doing as part of our biodiversity action plan that's been set up is we're converting what we'd sort of classify as various grades of amenity cut grass over to meadow grass and wildflower meadows where they're actually suitable, the soil conditions and the areas suitable for that as well. And we're getting a lot of interest from different town and parish councils because, of course, at the same time, they're also looking to see how they develop their own biodiversity action plans and what they're actually doing. And we're trying to work much more closely with other town and parish councils to assist them in the best way possible to do that. It might be through more machines, it might be through different machines. I'm challenging the team to say, we can't just have more machines, we have to be more, you know, farmers don't go and buy 10 combines and have them all sitting there so they can work during Monday to Friday at certain hours of the week, yeah? We need to expand how we're going to work and cover this at these busier times of year. But of course, we're also experiencing a growing season that is longer, and certain sites, I'm reliably informed by our biodiversity manager, can be cut at different times of the year, so it doesn't have to be a single cut all at the end of the traditional sort of end of the summer. So we're looking at all ways of doing that at the same time as we're in the background fleshing out our plans a lot more around biodiversity as well.
Councillor Grandin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This might seem a minor issue, but it is certainly one of the things that in summer I as a councillor get contacted about all the time, and that's grass cutting. You've sort of mentioned it in a sideways way just now, but not all areas of recreation or grass are suitable for meadow work. So can you tell me, last year it was slightly improved on previously, but it wasn't really the sort of magic change that I had been hoping for, and I still received complaints from residents. Can you tell me plans going forward? Because I think our changed weather conditions are now meaning that the grass seems to grow, seems to flourish more. But are we responding to that? And, you know, I have residents who have shared communal gardens in sheltered housing and so on, where they can't use their gardens in summer and couldn't last year because it wasn't being dealt with quickly enough by Babergh, but also the parks were not looking sufficiently better from this point of view, and we can't turn them over to meadow. You know, they're used for picnics and playing football and so on. So can you tell me the plans there, please?
Yes, thank you. Well, of course, one of the benefits of bringing the service in-house is sort of flexibility as well. And something we have experienced is, although quite rightly I'm first to put my hand up and say, yes, there are issues in places, and there have been, and we do get complaints, and we react and we deal with them. and we need to be more proactive. But the first piece of flexibility we have is to decide how frequently to cut the grass when the grass isn't growing as much like it was last year. We had more specimen weeds to deal with and the grass wasn't growing quite so much because of the dry conditions. Whereas in an outsourced arrangement from a value for money perspective, the contractor of course is still taking the council's money and not doing the work and finding something else to do with its staff, or just not backfilling those staff when they're away and they're off, and taking the benefits of that. We're actively reviewing our grass cutting grounds at the moment, as we do and should do every season. So that involves getting the crews in who really know about that as well, and where to cut the grass. The mapping work that we're doing is also contributing towards giving us better information to plan that. And I've certainly tasked all of the teams with reviewing those grass cutting schedules so that I can actually look at them and review them before the start of the season. And we will have the flexibility with the resources being in-house and controlled ourselves to try and increase the resource levels or decrease the resource levels if the grass isn't growing so much. We do have the machinery. We will have more resources and staff, particularly to help us, as we know, in housing. And since the annual budgets were agreed, we've moved very quickly and are about to start appointing staff in public realm and grounds, so that they will be available to work as the grass now starts to grow as well. And of course, you know, when we do miss something or it's something's missed off the schedules, we do try and react quickly and respond via the customer service channels available, which is better under an in-sourced arrangement than an outsourced arrangement as well. And looking a little bit further down the road, the work that we're doing on the mapping, the work that we're doing on the scheduling, producing the detailed rounds and scheduling, we're also looking to tail that work with a piece of work on mobile working, so that the crews who are now starting to use smartphones and tablets, as you can imagine, that's been a familiarisation and training exercise to work with crews to get them up to speed on that. We're expecting we will have a situation where we'll get positive confirmations that an area has been cut, and that will feed back to the centre, and we'll have that information available as well. So yeah, if there's something we've missed, please keep pointing it out. I'm not sitting here trying to defend that hasn't happened in the past, but I'd like to, from what is being fed to me and from what I'm seeing, we seem to be going in the right direction of travel.
Yes, because I'd like it to be that we don't get the calls, you know, that it's all preempted and you know, programmed by yourselves, rather than us having to keep regularly reminding public realm that an area still hasn't been done or whatever. So yeah, I mean that sounds promising. I hope it will. Because I think also what seems to happen now is that we might have a period where the grass doesn't grow, and then all of a sudden the weather changes and it shoots up, but the response isn't there. And I know that's really hard for you to monitor, and it might not seem a big thing, but to our residents it is a big thing.
It's difficult, you know, as we know with rain, with the sun, you know, the growing can, you know, the grass can flush and it can grow quite quickly, and when you've got a grass cutting cycle that's sort of set up, you have to kind of go round in that cycle, and suddenly we can be maybe 10 days off or more getting to a particular site. That isn't necessarily per se a problem in itself, but if you then miss the site or there's a problem in that and that's double the length, then we get that's a major issue. And we're expecting to see more positive improvement again. It was our first full season really last year since transfer in back from ID Verdi, and you know we feel we're getting a lot more sort of control of it now. I wasn't here to witness the standards under ID Verdi. You know, many of you obviously were, and you can maybe contextualise what that was versus under ID Verdi versus now, which is what I suppose I'm generally trying to answer here. But I do accept these points, and we want to become much more reactive in all our services. Although I've got plenty of examples, even just this last week, of where we are reacting to all sorts of things.
Thank you very much.
Well, Councillor Wellham essentially asked my question, which was about the wildflower meadow mowing equipment, and I think that was a really good question to ask, and I thank him for that, because there is a huge demand for equipment, as specialist collecting equipment for dealing with the wildflower meadows, and town parish councils, also farmers are looking for people that can do that kind of operation on it. But so maybe my question is, where we obviously have some operations that we need to do which are ones that we don't do very often, and we have to get contractors to come in and do it. That's got to be part of this. But is there any scope for buying an asset between many authorities? For instance, drain rodding lorries or that kind of equipment, and talking to other authorities and getting one bit of equipment that serves maybe the whole of Suffolk. It might be, drain rodding might be a bad example because we might do very little of it, but I just wondered what the scope was for that, and also the scope for actually having assets that contract privately when we're not using them to, yeah. Thanks.
I think they're both valid points, and I think there's scope for both of those type of suggestions really as well. I've been around long enough to see certain assets and certain specialist services like gully sucking and drain clearance kind of get axed or cut because of the frequency they were actually getting used, and then outsourced to contractors, same with some of the agricultural services and different things as well. So yes, certainly pairing up with other authorities, West Suffolk maybe, or Ipswich as well, to work with to say, is there scope for either sharing equipment or having a shared contract on some of that with a contractor who we might have a little bit more clout with if we bring our outsourced contracts together on some of that. I think makes sense. Aspirationally, I'd like to trade the services, but I'd want to do that from a strong base and make sure that we are delivering really great services which are excellent, which are meeting the needs. And I know we've got a challenge around a challenge in housing as we look to improve and assist Deborah with moving towards drive towards excellent in that area. And I just don't want to completely overstretch the team as we bring that in. But we should be planning now for, say, a year ahead or so, because these things don't happen immediately. They may require us to bring papers to gain support back through yourselves, Cabinet Council, etc. And we should be working in that direction. But I think aspirationally looking at that is good for public realm team and good for other teams, because it allows them to grow the size of their part of the organisation. It also exposes them to working for other customers rather than just residents as well, and that sometimes helps to sharpen up practice that's going on as well and make them more competitive and efficient. So I do see that as part of our future sort of model, really, to be honest, but we're just not quite there at the moment.
Thank you. Councillor Barron.
Thank you. I'd like to just talk about road sweeping. As you know, Mark, I've been looking at that, especially in Sudbury where I live, because it had really built up in some areas. It was obvious that some bits hadn't been swept for a couple of years at least. So I know that you have said, that some areas, some of the main routes are swept more regularly. What about the other routes that have cars parked on them regularly? What are your measures to try and get those areas swept?
Well, my focus at the moment with the team has really been on resourcing and making sure that we've got the resources fully staffed out each day, and getting our utilisation and uptime on vehicles being used during the working week, and we're improving on that. We did inherit a set of poor standards really from the contractor, where several routes many routes hadn't been getting swept at all, and that has taken a lot longer, particularly through this first full season, to try and get on top of. The team reassures me that we are utilising the equipment and vehicles we have, a threefold increase over the prior contractor, but that's still not enough really, and so we've been addressing some core issues like making sure we've got enough qualified Class 1 HGV drivers to drive the larger sweepers, setting up cover arrangements within the current staff base so that we have got some other members of the public realm team that have got Class 1 licences, but setting it up so that they can get paid an acting up allowance, so that they are getting paid the same as the sweeper drivers, and rotas for that and availability for that as well, so that we've been trying to make sure the vehicles are going out. We've also had some long-term sickness to deal with some of the drivers at the same time as well, which we've had to be mindful and compassionate of how we deal with that as well. But essentially, we will be looking to get the network swept much better than it is at the moment. Obviously, there's always a focus on certain primary roads and certain town areas, but I would like to get it into a position where we can get published routes effectively as well in the future, so that people know where we're going to be sweeping. We realise there's coordination and integration issues with areas, particularly with parked cars, and that can cause some issues. And optimistically, in the future, we want to the mechanised sweeping needs to be coordinated with crews on the ground as well that can try and be sweeping in some of those problem areas, and linking our systems up to do that. We're not there at the moment now, just being totally honest, but we're seeing improvements all the time, and we're expecting it to start improving going forward now that we've got the resourcing levels right really on it. That will be the first set of improvements, and going forward as well, we are looking at we're looking as well as we coordinate these rounds and schedules more about putting mobile devices into vehicles, so that any driver that then jumps into the vehicle can sort of seamlessly take over really, to be honest, and that's an option that we've been considering with the systems that we've got in the waste vehicles, as using the same system for that. We're about to bring that white space mobile in-cab system into some of the bin collection rounds for litter bins and dog waste bins as well, so that will start to help in those areas, so that we don't end up with missed bins, and we're looking to see if we can bring that in road sweeping in the future as well.
Councillor Dawson?
Yes, my question is really public. Their main concern versus all the weeds and waste. And I think last year there was a plan to
Have you got your microphone on, Councillor?
Sorry. To take back all the in-house. We were going to have 1.5 man, someone was going to go around on a mini tractor with the fertiliser on their backpack and blitz the whole of Babergh and mid-Suffolk. Now, to my knowledge, that never really happened. And it slightly concerns me, particularly with the coronation coming up. People want to see sort of tidy streets in the towns, etc., as well as the villages. So was that plan shelved, or is it still ongoing for this year? And if so, when is it going to be happening in the areas where there's large numbers of people? Because it's really noticeable how bad it is, but I realise formally that's a county. But we were meant to have brought that in-house at the end of last year.
Apologies, I don't know the answer to that, I'm afraid. I'm happy to bring that answer back. It's not something that I can't recall. As you know, I've been here a relatively short time, but I can't recall having a conversation with the public realm team on weed spraying or what was agreed last year. I do know with weed spraying there's usually issues over whose responsibility it is between the county councils and ours, but by the sounds of it, that discussion was one that was had, and we were looking to see if we could bring some control over that back in-house. I know our approach to weed as well as weed spraying. I know we've got the ripper units which you swap out on the street sweeping vehicles, on the medium-sized and smaller vehicles as well, that have been going along and ripping weeds back out of the gullyways as well. So that, I know that's been going on as well, but I'm happy to take that question back and respond on it.
Yes, and if we could have a schedule for the towns, particularly, when it's going to be done, because I don't believe, for about 3 years, it actually was done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Lindsay.
Thanks, Chair. Can I just make some observations and then ask my questions, then it'll be obvious why I'm asking the questions. I'm really excited by the fact that we've now got, it sounds like a lot, 23,123 square metres of grassland has now become managed as meadow. When you work out how much that is in acres, it's nearly 5, which doesn't sound like a huge amount when you do it that way. We have got a biodiversity crisis. We don't see insects. Some of us will remember in our youth going on long journeys and seeing your windscreen splattered with insects. That doesn't happen now because everyone expects a green, micromanaged, sort of immaculate monoculture green sward. I feel like our parks don't have to be, people, Councillor Grandin referred to people wanting to picnic. If I was having a picnic, I'd rather have a chance of seeing some butterflies and some bees when I picnic, rather than a few flies, which is all that's left when you just manage a field and mow it every day and weed kill it and all the rest of it. I think we need to encourage our residents to accept that if they want to have some insects, they want to see the birds, they need the insects. And if they want the insects, we need to manage our grassland a bit more lightly, rather than expensively mowing every month. So I think that's where I know it's a particular problem if you're a councillor in a town, residents will say, why isn't this place mown like it used to be? And I think we do have to push back a bit as leaders in our community and say, well, you've got a choice here. Do you want to restore biodiversity, or do you just want a perfectly green lawn which is actually a desert? And the same applies, I'm afraid, even for going around blasting everywhere with glyphosate. I think our residents have to. That is a toxic chemical to the ecosystems and to humans. The county council next year will cease all use of glyphosate. I think we need, again, to encourage people, we need to tolerate a few more weeds. Weeds are wildflowers, and we need to learn to tolerate them a bit more. Apart from anything else, it's much cheaper for us as a council. And there are ways that I sat on the biodiversity panel, and we were looking at ways, and we talked about getting rid of spraying and with pesticides like glyphosate, and the idea was to use either mechanical ways of pulling up the weeds, or a way that's environmentally friendly that doesn't use pesticides. So the talk of vinegar was being used. So I don't know what's happened with that, but that was the plan. I remember that the biodiversity panel discussed and agreed. So I'll now get to my questions. Do we have a target for the total amount of grassland that we'd like to become, the percentage of our grassland that we own, that we'd like to become managed for meadows? Because I feel that even in parks, you can mow a small strip people want to be able to walk through. You can mow bits, but you don't have to mow the whole park. So do we have a target, and where are we on that? Are there any plans for a kind of marketing communications plan to encourage acceptance that our grass would be a bit higher, there would be more flowers, there would be more dandelions, because they're to feed the bees. East Suffolk has a programme like that. It's been, I understand, quite successful, East Suffolk Council. And that when we were talking about getting some doubters, when we were talking about getting a cut and collect mowing machine on the biodiversity panel, there was people were worried about, well, what do you do with you're collecting the cuttings, what do you do with them, where do you put them? So I just wonder if that has been a problem or not. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for those questions. Yeah, I think the short answer, if you spoke to the public realm team, in general, I think we all want to go much further with biodiversity, and we'll be bringing our draft strategy for biodiversity back. We just started working on it actually in much more detail. We have a biodiversity action plan for both councils, and my general observation on that, we're ahead of the targets on the action plan, but the targets on grass cutting, as you know, there's not much really relating to it there as well. I think, you know, we want to increase the level of meadow grass cutting. It is a challenge. We're working with that. We want to go much further. There is some signage going out on areas, but are we doing as much as formally trying to market that as a campaign, or doing that as much as we should? Maybe we're not. There's signage going out, but that could happen as well. In terms of sort of biodiversity strategy, we want to cover off, you know, why we need a strategy, the legislation and policy that we're trying to address, which is coming in from government, which us and town and parish councils are going to have to work on. We've been doing a lot of work internally with planning, preparing and working with them on biodiversity net gain. They know they're going to have to bring that in later this year, so there's a lot of internal working that's been going on with there, because changes to supplementary planning documents and biodiversity net gain requirements are going to be a huge benefit, hopefully, across the board there as well. And we really want to look and address opportunities to work much more closely with partners working in our area, Suffolk Wildlife Trust, and there's many others that are way further on this journey than what we are, and we can harness their expertise and work closer with them, and participate more widely with the county councils, develops its local nature recovery strategies as well. There's plenty of funding out there that we can attract to do this, and get this sort of change that we need to happen through. But I feel as well that we do need to manage it in conjunction with what we're changing from and what we're going to, and there are still some requirements for more formal recreational areas for members of the community to enjoy in different ways, but there's no reason why that can't be alongside wildflower planting and meadow management in those areas as well. So yeah, I don't disagree with anything that's been said there, really, to be honest. It's just and I think we're better, bringing us, but I suppose the general question on bringing the service back in-house from an outsourced contractor, it's clearly an easier position to be in when we're delivering this ourselves to achieve these aims and changes and be more flexible than with a contractor who would say that doesn't exist as part of the specification of the contract. Can I have some more money, please, or not be so, interested in it as we are ourselves. Obviously, we've done a lot of data work. We know we've got some really good data on where all our trees are now as well, and that's helping to target and inform the strategy of where those trees get planted with the right tree in the right place. I just feel probably we've got to do a better job of saying what we're doing, marketing what we're doing, and working more effectively with town and parish councils. And yeah, 4 or 5 acres of meadow under management doesn't sound like a massive area when you change it to that. There's lots of smaller sites, obviously, that comprise of that. And we work on each of those sites. Our preferred option is not to have to take the risings away anywhere, because it costs money to dispose of, and it doesn't make sense. So we try and find locations on site to store the grass cuttings, and if we can turn that into compost on site, or we're increasing biodiversity by storing that on site as well, then we look to do that. But I think it's just massive opportunity, really, to be honest, and I think we can do that in a way that keeps everyone happy. We work together on it.
Councillor Carter.
Thank you. Going back to the vehicles, and you mentioned about possibly putting the mobiles in place. Would that not put at a possible target for vandalism or thievery, where they've had this issue in not ambulances, but the makeshift ambulances? They had them in place and they were targeted for vandals, with people trying to rip out the thing. Would that not put them at risk for people trying to target them? And another question going to slightly different. Mentioned by Councillor Grandon regards not all areas being suitable for meadow growing, and also mentioned rather more lengthy by Councillor Lindsay. I will say that's possibly for care homes and things like that, the meadow grass growing may not be suitable. One thing we've mentioned before, well, I've certainly mentioned, replacement with low-growing UK native tapestry mixes. Now these, if you have mixes with daisies, you have mixes with clover, not only are they firmer and make it easier for if you have a mobility scooter or a wheelchair, they make it a lot easier to actually move about in. They need cutting far less frequently, and they also, the clover especially, it draws in a lot more carbon from the atmosphere, puts it into the ground, and actually can be used for making nitrogen fertiliser, and also for seed mixes for feeding wildlife, feeding animals, which we've mentioned many times in the past. It's being looked into, and then we hear nothing from it. So would it not be possible to look into this and actually implement it? Because it'd be a lot less work for a grounds team having to go to these areas where there's maybe a need to do once a year to be trimmed up. It's more work putting in, needs scarification, needs to be turned upside down, and then needs to be grown upwards. But wouldn't it be worthwhile putting the effort in at the start, and then having a low maintenance, less work from going on from application onwards?
Thank you for those questions. Yeah. So the first question, mobiles in vehicles, mobile working. We don't consider it would be an issue of being targeted. It's not something we hear across the industry of it being a problem. Something like the vans that are collecting the bins, obviously refuse freighters all got mobile devices in them already. Driver tends to stay in the vehicle, I know. Collecting the litter bins and the dog bins, you're not far from a vehicle doing that, or street sweeping, you're kind of in there. Whether we put, in terms of mobile working in the pickup trucks for the rest of the public realm team, we typically deliver that via an app from mobile working on their smartphone. It's something they'd probably then keep with them, so it wouldn't be in the vehicle. So I don't think that would be so much of an issue there. Suitability of meadows and planting, yeah, that's exactly the sort of detail and investment we need to be making going forward. Apologies, obviously I haven't used the fact that I haven't been here, I haven't heard that challenge before. I do understand and know that turning a piece of amenity grass into a wildflower meadow doesn't just happen, and needs to be ploughed up and replanted and looked after, and it's a bit of a myth thinking it's less work involved in doing that. It's just different work at different times and front loaded, and it's really typical, I suppose, of the scale of change that we're undergoing in our area of public realm and the industry, I suppose, as well, to raise our game and answer the challenge. I'd draw us back to saying in the question here that we're better in-house to be doing it than we are to be trying to outsource that. And I feel we're now getting into the position where we've been recovering the standards that we've inherited, particularly in Babergh, and we can start going further and start actually investing in making this change happen and change in the service. And I think it's not just about meadow cutting. We need to be much more ambitious and look at look at taking on board more sites. There's quite a bit of activity going on in planning and different sites that are likely to be coming our way from adoptions, and that's something that the team also looks after and does, giving its feedback in there, and that's ideal opportunities to get the design of those sites right from the start, really, to be honest. We're working with the developer, so it's not something that we've got to change over, not something we've got to do, and we've been having a lot of input into that, because we've got a specialist technical biodiversity manager in the team that's working across both districts, and that is starting to have some benefit, I think, as well.
Thank you. I've got Councillors Grandin, Barrett, Wellham and Carston left to speak. So we'll start with ladies first. Councillor Barrett.
Very much. One quick question and then a broader question, Mark. Is it your intention to operate the sweeper 5 days a week, ultimately? Shall I do my second question before it's... my area that I district councillor for is along the border with Essex, so Bures and Nayland, and obviously live in Sudbury as well, so bordering Essex. What can happen is that those areas right close up to the border can get a little bit sort of forgotten, because they are the outlying districts of our area, and we can sometimes, and then what happens is your opposing numbers in the other council also leave a sort of strip that is a bit neglected. It's no man's land. Is there any liaison or with your neighbouring councils on sort of litter or maintenance at all? So 2 areas.
Yeah, so from a sweeper point of view, yes, we'd look to be operating that 5 days a week. It might be possible to operate it longer than 5 days a week. I'm not going to commit to that, but ultimately one of my principles would be looking at when I'm happy with managing the services as optimally as we can, then you start to look and say, how can we utilise the equipment better than we do at the moment, and is there a cost-benefit case for doing that? So clearly you don't want to be sweeping at night and waking people up. I'm not suggesting that for 1 second. On the border issue, there's some informal dialogue and conversation that goes on. I'd say it's more Suffolk-centric than looking south to Essex, but there's no reason why it shouldn't be looking more south to Essex as well. And I'll certainly pass that back, and also pass back the specific issue of crossover on the border. And we should just, regardless, we should be making sure that all of our district proportionally gets some of the attention that it deserves.
It's such a problem in the summer.
Yeah, we're aware of some of the seasonal impacts of tourism in the south of the Babergh district, particularly, or whatever like that, and the areas of outstanding natural beauty there, but the pressure that visitor numbers brings as well. And we do work down into Essex there with colleagues, particularly on other matters regarding sort of car parking enforcement and stuff as well.
So I'm not accused of being misogynistic or anything like that. Councillor Wellham.
Thank you, Chair. Last summer there were some real successes around changes to mowing regimes. One that I was partly involved in was in Cedars Park in Stonemarket, not in my patch, but in Dave's patch and Terrace's patch. But I was involved in that because it was Verge, it was county, it was district, and so on. And Richard Palmy did some really good negotiating there, but we never sought to get any compliments for it. So I think we've done some really good work, and we really need to let people know that it's the district council, it's our staff who are making these changes. And I think that's really important. Mark, you made the point about cut and collect. I was fortunate in spending half a day with Suffolk Wildlife Trust out in Stow Upland just a few days ago, and one of the points they made was about cut and collect. and how we need to cut it, we need to collect it, but we don't need to take it off site. And there's a lot of advantages in that for protection for vertebrates and invertebrates. So, I mean, that's something which I think people need to know about. And I feel that we need to get parish councils and others more on board. Talking with Suffolk Wildlife Trust, in many areas the parish councils are the most difficult people to convert, and it's certainly the case in Stow Upland, where I asked for no mow May for this year, and they said, oh no, Prince Charles wouldn't like it for his coronation, people would want to go out and picnic. I thought, well, Prince Charles is probably the one person in the country who would be really pleased. But you know, I wonder if there's scope. I'm not suggesting that you arrange such workshops, but for Suffolk Wildlife Trust or SALC or somebody to set up workshops for parish councils and others, and so that the message gets over that we all want to do the same thing, but parish councils need to know what we want to do and what residents want, and they need to get on board. Thank you.
My own parish, for instance, pays a litter picker to go around the village, and also obviously manages the sports grounds, where of course you can't turn those into a wildflower meadow, otherwise the footballers and the cricketers might complain. And just to correct you, Councillor Wellham, it's King Charles, not Prince Charles. He was elevated to being king on the death of his mother.
I apologise to our king. Thank you very much, Chair. Parish councils are very, very different, and there are some parish councils doing really, really good work, and we need them to be on our side, and we need to let other parishes know what can be done. Thank you.
Well, yeah, it's just I'm agreeing. Find myself agreeing again. Certainly we need to improve our communications about biodiversity in general. We've got a great comms team doing some really good work at the moment, and there's going to be lots of opportunities there for us to improve in that area. We're starting to win awards for the likes of the pieces of tree work that we did as well with the tree data and stuff, so I'm sure we can get further comms on the back of that as well. And yeah, working with others to improve. There's lots of knowledge out there for us to gain from, including Suffolk Wildlife Trust, obviously, and others, but we need to work much more closely with town and parish councils, and biodiversity is much wider than planting trees, planting hedges, converting amenity cut grass over to meadow grass, and then some of that meadow grass into wildflower meadows. But when you look at our biodiversity action plan, it's not much wide. There are some other activities on it as well. It's maybe not that much wider than that, which was great to get going. But actually, that's one of the reasons why we as a team now feel we're doing some of that. But if we're really going to make a difference, we need to kind of present much more of a strategy of what we're doing going forward, and then hopefully that is something that you feel you'll be able to support if you're in that position to do so in the future for us, please.
Councillor Grandin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Couple of points I'd like to make, please. Returning to the maintenance of our parks, I think there needs to be different strategies for different places, which I hope you're probably doing. For example, in one of our main parks in Hadley, Cox Park, it's known locally as, last year it was cut in the main areas, and then the areas around the outside where trees are growing, that was left to grow wild. And I think that's completely acceptable. But the main area that people use to walk and play ball games and so on does need to be cut. A strip going through, I'm afraid, wouldn't work. I think we do have to think that public parks in the main, and there may be exceptions, and that's for you in your strategy to look at each park and examine how it's used, would need to be the main bit that people use would need to be cut, and having a strip going through as was suggested by my colleague, I don't think would work for public parks. So that's, but you need to have a strategy and see what works in each place, which, as I say, I hope you're doing. And the other thing I just wanted to ask is, we've heard a lot on the news lately about Sheffield and Plymouth, where there seems to be a strategy of cutting down mature trees. Can we be assured, and I would hope that this might go down in the minutes, that such actions will never happen in our councils, because that was the most shocking, appalling situation. In Sheffield, it's been going on a long while, I understand. I hope there will never be any excuses to do anything like that in our districts, and I would hope you can assure us that that will never happen in our districts, please.
I'd certainly not want to be cutting down any tree that wouldn't need to be taken down for reasons of sort of health and safety. Effectively, it's the only logical reason that we've got, or if we know that there's damage to the tree or disease to the tree that's likely to result in part of it falling over or branches coming off. We've got two managers of trees in our service. One works more with planning, one works more directly in our service, and I know we do a lot of safety inspection and work on trees to prevent that sort of thing from happening. But certainly, no, we would not want to be cutting trees down. We're trying to plant more trees across the patch, really, to be honest, as much as we can, and get the right tree in the right place. One of the particular areas we struggle to plant trees is in the urban environment. We know that there are lots of benefits to having trees planted in towns, and that's something that we're going to be looking to redouble our efforts to work with the county and highways now that they've got a new contractor as well, and try and see how many more opportunities we can get to try and get some more trees into our urban environment. They are more challenging, they are more expensive to put in the right way, but there can be some massive benefits from doing that as well.
Councillor Carston.
Thank you very much. I believe plane trees go very well in urban environments. This has just reminded me of something that happened, because there's a lot of talk about this biodiversity, and I understand that you're Director of Operations and you're not Corporate Manager of Public Realm. But before, or just at the start of COVID, me and another councillor, Councillor Pratt, after the biodiversity work was done, we sat down and we mapped out every single Mid-Suffolk owned area in every single village in Mid-Suffolk, and designated it whether it was suitable for planting fruit trees, rewilding, wildflower meadows, and everything like that. We basically saw that there was 3 different types of land that we own. We've got land that's suitable for rewilding, wildflower meadows, or fruit trees. There's land that needs to be kept cosmetically good, though the benefit of a small area of cosmetically managed grass is absolutely nothing compared to a large area of biodiversity project. And the other bit was places where access infrastructure needed protecting for safety reasons. We would have to be pretty ruthless with things growing, especially where disabled access and things needs to be maintained. It was a really good bit of work. So COVID was there. I remember it went on people's doorsteps and they looked at it. I also shared a lot of the sites with the ward members for that, so that they could know what we'd identified. But people have changed positions, and I wonder if that work has just been lost now. It's I've still got the original copy, in my desk at home. But it would be a real shame, because it seems to me like there's 3 ways of managing different. There might be 5, there might be 50, but for simplicity, it seemed like there was areas that we must not put glyphosate on. I think those first 2, the cosmetic and the wildflower sort of designated sites, shouldn't have it. But sometimes we might want to consider whether it's the right thing to use where infrastructure will get damaged, where slabs will get pulled up by roots and things like that, and people with accessibility issues won't actually be able to use the facilities. But so there is a question here. So how much of that do you think has actually been? I know the person responsible left the council, before that could have gone in, but whether that work was passed on, because we did spend hours and hours and hours during lockdown just pondering over these sites and discussing things on the telephone and that. So have you seen anything of that, or do we want to revisit it, or maybe look at adapting it so it's something that can be used in public realm?
I have seen some evidence of it actually as well. So whilst my role is Director of Operations, and unfortunately Will couldn't be here today, but yeah, I've seen evidence of that, because I've sat down over the shoulder of our officers that are showing me mapping on screens where they're showing that these areas are mapped as wildflower meadows, and these areas are mapped where the trees have gone in and planted there. Our biodiversity manager, Richard Palmy, I've heard him talking to me about schemes in areas where there's been planting of fruit trees going in and that as well. So anecdotally, I've heard bits and pieces. As a formal delivery against that piece of work that was done, I don't know what's still there or not, and whether that is specifically being reported on. But I know from what you're saying there, elements of that have made it into our mapping and what we're talking about there. And I think it sounds like it'd be a real waste not to make sure that wasn't captured. And I'll have a conversation with our biodiversity manager, Richard Palmy, and I'll probably welcome yourself and Councillor Pratt having a conversation with him as well to see where we've got to on that.
Thank you. Councillor Muller.
Yes, thank you very much.
If we can take this one as the last question, I think we've... sorry, Councillor Carter's...
I would like to totally concur with Councillor Wellham, what you were saying about Cedars Park. I live on Cedars Park, and I did have the opportunity to meet up with Richard Palmy last year. Well, I had several complaints about the rewilding, but also a lot of positive comments about the rewilding. And I would say generally the positive comments outweighed the negative comments. I personally was in favour of it. I thought it was really good. And I think a really useful exercise. But going on from that, we've identified a couple of areas on Cedars Park where we could plant some more trees. I've spoken to a couple of the residents, and I've actually written to your colleagues in Public Realm this morning to see if that can be taken forward. I think it's really, really important for biodiversity, and hopefully that will be the case. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Carter.
Thank you. Very pleased to hear about not wanting to cut down any healthy trees. I'm sure Stowmarket will be most relieved you won't be targeting any walnuts. But regards to the road sweeper that's going to be out 5 days a week, I would be amiss not to ask, how is that fuelled? Because there are councils who have electric road sweepers. Aberdeen is the first council to actually have fully hydrogen road sweepers. Are we looking to be purchasing, making sure we've just done our bins, our bin collection, which was nicely received, it's been quite well. Are we going to look to do the same for all our vehicles, or all our fleet, to try to bring down the carbon emissions? And if we are looking to be purchasing more, are we going to have a new renaming competition? I was very sore that mine didn't get picked. You know, I'd quite like to see a Sweepy McSweep my face, but you never know.
I'm sure the team would consider a naming competition should that happen, because obviously there's a lot of scope with street sweepers. same as refuse freighters. I will check, but I was under the impression that the road sweepers were also being fueled by HVO, which is available out of both depots as well, where the road sweepers are actually based. Yeah, so okay. In terms of future fuelling of those types of vehicles, we need to consider what's right. A few weeks ago, I attended the East Suffolk hosted hydrogen conference over at Lowestoft, and yeah, hydrogen is coming as a fuel source, but it's not available for us to readily tap into at the moment. I don't feel, particularly on the road sweeper side there, or the refuse fleet side. We would consider all fuel sources and the most appropriate alternative fuel source at the next time of replacement for any vehicle. And also part of this discussion is also tied into infrastructure to allow for the refueling to take place, as well as contract management as part of that sometimes as well. And as you'll be aware, we've got commitment for funding subject to a full business case being developed and accepted by both councils to look at developing and bringing forward plans for new depots, and we'll be looking at that those new facilities there in terms of how the refueling would work. So do we put a combination? Do we allow enough space for hydrogen refueling and bunkering on site? Do we or biogas if it was biogas, or put in the connections for sustainable electric to be coming in, enough space for battery charging to be on site, for the solar panels which we have on the roof, etc. And we're looking at all those options as part of that project, really, to be honest. But yeah, depending on where in the country and what access has been to different fueling arrangements and capital available, you know, we're aware different councils have already moved in that field.
Thank you very much indeed for that presentation and for all the questions. I have to say that from my own personal point of view, 40 years of working in the amenity and local government sector as far as grass and amenity areas maintenance is concerned, I've seen quite a few changes. You mentioned Aberdeen, I think, Councillor Carter. Well, I can remember when I went to Aberdeen on one occasion, and I was it was explained to me why they only grew roses down their central reservations. And that was because it was the only plant that would tolerate the levels of salt that they put on the roads. So everywhere is different. And that's one of the wonderful things about travelling around the country and looking at all these places. Everywhere's different, and we have to sort out what is suitable for us. I can also remember when paraquat was commonplace, not just in suicides, but also in killing weeds, before glyphosate came along. So things keep moving along the whole time, and we just have to keep up with them. Thanks very much. Yeah.
Sorry, Chair, just one final point as well. Will Birchall couldn't be with us this morning, but he's helped, fortunately he's attending his dad's funeral this morning, but Will has helped significantly to put together this paper. And I'd just like, obviously I've been here a few months, but I'd just like to record my thanks for what Will's done for the service over the last couple of years, because I was involved in, from a consultant point of view, of the decision to bring it back in-house and putting that report together. But I'm really pleased in the position I am now, of the hard work that Will's put into turning things around, really.
Thanks very much indeed. Now, this paper is for noting, but Councillor Wellham did suggest, should I say, rather than request, that perhaps we should put a recommendation forward to Cabinet. Councillor Muller.
Yeah, thank you. Now, I totally agree with what Councillor Wellham raised earlier, that we should perhaps make a recommendation that it would be helpful if the Cabinet members could attend these meetings in future. So if that was a proposal by Councillor Wellham earlier, I'm happy to second that.
Just a moment.
Can I just jump in? Actually, in the Constitution, there is already provision for that, so the portfolio holder should be invited along. I think it's more about our processes and tightening up, because it was an information bulletin. We need actually at the chair's briefing to just tighten up who we need to invite. So there is provision already in the Constitution, so I don't think there's any need for a recommendation.
So I think stamped in large print on the chairman's backside will be something which says, look more carefully at who should be invited to the meeting in future so that we can make sure the cabinet members are here. Pardon?
How can you see your own backside? I don't want to know, actually.
Councillor Carston.
I don't know if we want to add with this that I'm really impressed with what's going on here. I think this is the right direction. I think Babergh are making a good decision to bring that in-house. And also this is a really good way of realising our biodiversity ambitions and getting in a position where we can increase them and we can make them stronger and stronger as we go on. So yeah, I think thank you very much for what you're doing, and yeah, really pleased with today's meeting.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you. I do agree we need more wild meadows, but in town centres they're not really suitable, and yet we still want to increase the range of biodiversity. So I think actually we need to add to that other areas can be cultivated in town centres. They don't have to all be tiny little patches of grass, which we have done in my street in Sudbury, and it has improved the birds and bees and butterflies enormously, just in one area. So it doesn't always have to be a wild meadow to achieve that.
I think it's fair to say there's a vast range of different plants that can be utilised to increase biodiversity, and they can be put into small areas, whether it be shrubs or just bedding plants or whatever, something to increase the biodiversity that way. But it's going to be different for each area because both councils are primarily rural areas. Yes, we have population concentrations, but they're different from the rural areas, and it makes the challenge for the public realm team even greater in terms of trying to meet the requirements of the different types of areas. Are we content now to just note this? Councillor Dawson.
Yes, I just wanted to also make the recommendation going forward. I mean, I've asked this a number of times. I do think that as a shadow cabinet, I'd like to see a schedule, the continuation, which I did, of a monthly schedule of actually what's happening with Iverdi, just as a note, because that really was so useful. And I have to say, in the last 5 months, that's not happened. And that way, we can all sort of keep on top of what's happening or what's not happening. But certainly, in the last few months, it's probably because you're new, I don't know whether you're aware of it, they always used to do a monthly update, which was distributed to councillors, and I'd like to see that happen again.
It's not something that I've been made aware of, but so the Public Realm Service would send a monthly update note out to all councillors, would they?
There's a monthly meeting, and I would distribute it. There's a PowerPoint that's done every single month, so the number of dog bins you empty, what streets you're doing, where you're fertilising. It's really very, very efficient. And I've not seen that the last 5 months, and I would highly recommend that your cabinet member for environment must see it at her monthly briefing, if she's going to those, I presume. Yes?
Well, I think we're all going to, there'll be considerable changes for the next meeting.
I'd like to have a monthly update. I mean, it was very efficient, I thought.
If you can send me a copy of the last update that you received, please, then I'll take up where that came from and when it was last made and how that's happening and whether it's something we can continue or reproduce.
But I think because of the number of departures, maybe it's got lost, you know, with Cass leaving, Will leaving, Sarah, a lot of the people have all left, so it may well have just got, but I would have thought each month you're briefing the cabinet member, and therefore when you brief her, you must provide her with that information.
Yes, yeah, we provide a
How do you provide? Do you do it as a
we provide a PowerPoint briefing monthly from operations.
Yes, so a summary of that would be useful again to have for all members, I believe. Certainly was for me.
Councillor Osborne, you have a point to make?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yep, just on that point, I think every portfolio holder has meetings with the representatives, the officers of that particular item that is being dealt with by that group. So, yeah, that is done, so I know that. I would just like to say that, as I am aware, particularly in Sudbury, the changes that have been carried out since the in-house set-up, and I agree with Councillor yeah, the councillor on my right. And it's been, you know, it has been excellent, and I'm afraid that the problems that we had with our last incumbent in realm has, I'm afraid, been, you know, they didn't do a lot at all, but this, from my perspective, from where I have looked around Sudbury, the road sweepings are done, things are getting done, hedges are getting cut at the right time where they weren't being dealt with before. So I'd like to congratulate our Director of Operations and the information bulletin that he's provided. I think it was excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Right, so if there are no more comments on that, that report was for noting. We have also noted the fact that we will be making sure that the appropriate cabinet member is invited to the next, to the appropriate overview and scrutiny committee meetings. So if we move on to item 9 on the agenda, which is the overview and scrutiny committee action tracker. This again is for noting. Do any members have any comments?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's on page 29, just a couple of comments. The top panel, there are 3 items there which are not started. And on the face of it, it looks as if people haven't been doing what they should have been doing. But I think the first 2, the toolkit and the training session, I think we agreed that they should be prepared, ready for the May new member training. So it's not as if they haven't been started. I'm sure that there are officers who are preparing them. So I think it's unfortunate that it says it's not started. But members won't see any outcome until, well, only those who are re-elected will see any outcome. But I think that work is going on. The one thing I would query is 1.7, because I'm surprised that we haven't had any feedback. There was a strategic assessment carried out by the County Council into the community safety partnerships across the county. And I think all we needed was to have some information from that, perhaps just information relevant to our 2 districts, but we don't know whether that information is available. It would be useful to know, at least if it's available, and if not, well, why not? Because it ought to be, I guess it ought to be a public document. It may be a public document, people may have access to it. We just need to know whether we can be provided formally with that information. It probably won't be a worry for me in May, but it might be something which is useful before the June overview and scrutiny committee. And that brings me on to the last point, which is that June is traditionally an overview and scrutiny meeting, the first of the 4 years. It's usually a training session. So will that go to the June committee, or will the whole of the June committee be taken up with training? Or can the training be outside of a public committee, and so that training could be carried out before the June overview and scrutiny committee meeting, which would then look at community safety partnership. Officers particularly asked for that to go to the June committee, and we agreed. So I don't know where we are with that. I think it's just dates need to be sorted, I think.
So, Chair, just to clarify, we are obviously looking at the training induction programme for councillors at the moment. The plan was to use the first dates for the committees to do some training, because obviously councillors can't sit on the committee until we've undertaken some sort of training, and then dedicate the first meeting to work programming. So we were going to push this back to the first of the July meetings. We had been having conversations with officers about whether that would still be appropriate. So the consensus was that it was. And we did, I think there's been an email out to chairs to say about the training for the first few sessions, which I thought you had agreed, but we can take that out. Just on the other stuff, the toolkit and the training session, that is in hand and will be part of the councillor induction programme, so that we can actually say that that has commenced.
So, Chair, if that means that the Community Safety Partnership review is moved to July, it takes up a whole morning, does the review of the Community Safety Partnership. And I think the review of the situation in respect of sewage in rivers would take up a whole morning. So there needs to be some rethinking of the programming. Work plan isn't on the agenda, that's why I'm raising it now. There needs to be a rethinking of that to make sure that both of those two have a fair amount of time.
Chair, and through you, we can always obviously convene another additional meeting if we need to, but that's a discussion for the new chairs once we know who they are in May. Yeah.
No other comments on the action tracker? Well, that concludes the business for today's meeting, but I would just like to say thank you very much indeed to all of you for your efforts during the course of the time when I've been joint chairman of this committee. I wish you all the very best at the elections if you're standing. For those that aren't standing, enjoy the retirement. And we'll see how many of us appear at the next overview and scrutiny meetings. Thank you very much indeed.